Longshoremen across the eastern seaboard of the United States are threatening to go on strike on October 1st if a couple of their demands are not met for their next union contract. Okay, we have been going through a union kind of moment here in the United States over the last 2 years. The UAW has won a ton of successful moves. There was a strike over in Kellogg's in 2022 or around then, and that was a huge victory for unionizations. We had the writers' strike that represented a huge victory. So there has been a huge movement, okay, for these unions, and the longshoremen are prepared to top off and add another victory to the union ladder here. But it's a little more complicated than other type of union activities. And let's get into a couple of the details here. So currently, top scale longshoremen, these are the guys that unload massive freight ships. Okay, the current top scale at these ports make like $39 an hour. It's about $81,000 a year. But with their overtime, they can make up to like $200,000. But again, that's with overtime. That means there's a ton of these longshoremen that are working almost like 100 hours a week in order to operate. Okay, and that's just to keep these ports operational. Okay. Luckily, the United States hasn't had to deal with a longshoreman strike since 1977 because they've been effective at heading off a lot of this anger. However, the union has walked away from the table back in June here, and they have not developed and moved forward with the conversation. And if the Maritime Alliance isn't able to come to an agreement with the longshoreman union, there's going to be a lot of problems. Now, a couple of the longshoreman demands are fairly reasonable. Some of them, I think, pose a greater threat to the United States that actually aren't good demands. And it's a really good example of when unions, while I am in mass support of unions and the right to collectively bargain, just because a union is asking for something does not mean that that something is right. And it is crucial for all of us to look into the details of these union contracts and make sure that it's great for the workers, and the workers get the respect that they deserve, and they get the rights to the profits of the corporations that they are helping to create and that are crucial to their operation, but also that it's not directly damaging the public. Okay, and one of the things that the longshoreman is asking for is specifically damaging to the public. But let's get through what's not damaging to the public. They are asking for a 77% wage increase over 6 years. Now, a 77% wage increase over 6 years sounds crazy. But when you take into account the fact that since they had their last contract negotiation, inflation has diminished a lot of the purchasing power of their negotiated wages that they had 10 years ago. Okay, so that 77% wage increase is actually catching them back up and then putting a little bit ahead of their previous purchasing power. It's not an overwhelming amount of purchasing power that they're demanding now. Okay, but there is one specific area here that is very, very crucial and would be frankly bad for America if it became true. Okay, Daggett, this is the president of the Longshoremen's Union, wants to stop the automation of job functions at ports well into the future. He says, and I quote, "We do not believe that robotics should take over human beings' jobs, especially a human being that's historically performed that job." If that was the case, and you really thought that way, we would not be producing cars the way we produce right now. We would not be able to have the vast majority of our consumer goods that we've been able to have. Our productivity in this country would not be as great as it is, which makes us as dynamic and rich as we truly are. Okay, if we're going to be that much against automation for the sake of saving jobs, we are going to lose out on a greater economic story and a greater economic progress for this country. Now, does that mean that I want these workers to go out on their ass? Absolutely not. And there's a really good example of this, okay? They looked at if we go to the port of Rotterdam, okay? Rotterdam is one of the biggest, most automated ports in the world. It's in the Netherlands, okay? The unions pushed for early retirement packages and work time reductions as a mean to preserve jobs. Now, that proved extremely effective. They saw almost no layoffs. No one really lost their job. And from the work time reductions, their lives were able to get better. Their standard of living was able to get better. And that is the path that I think these unions need to take. It is not worth it for us. Well, it's not it's not reasonable for the workers in this country to be Luddites. Okay, and when I say Luddites, it means that people who were against mechanization back in the 1600s in Europe, and they would run around and smash like textile machines, okay, because they thought that it was taking their jobs. This is basically the longshoremen in the United States being Luddites of the 21st century. And there's no reason for it, because what you can demand, instead of being against automation, you can demand early retirement packages. You can demand reductions in work time hours. You can do things that better your life, in addition to allowing the productive nature of the United States to continue to expand and get better by embracing automation. But it's imperative. The union is obviously making a good point here. We don't want the profits and the benefits of automation to be sucked away by the capitalist class in a way that we, the average person, never sees the benefit of. Okay, and that's very true. These workers who've worked in these ports have been the reason that they're making, $50 billion more, $50 billion in profits over the last 4 years. The reason that that's happening is because the longshoremen have contributed to that. And so we don't want the longshoremen not to get their piece of that pie, okay? They deserve a piece of that pie. We just cannot have it reduce the productivity of the nation's economy overall. So there's other ways to grab the piece of that pie. Early retirement packages, work time hour reductions. These are the ways you do it, not by stopping economic growth and productivity. Okay. And so now this is going to be kind of dicey. We have a couple days until this will go into effect, and they'll go on strike, or they'll come to some sort of short-term to long-term agreement. If we're looking at like a 1 week strike, you probably won't feel the effects, because a lot of these companies that are importing products from overseas have bought way more than they normally need because they were anticipating a strike. So they're currently sitting on a stockpile of goods that could very, very quickly dry up within 2 to 3 weeks of a strike. By the 4th week, we're looking at a pretty intense economic slowdown that could be caused by this. And it's not good, to say the least. I think the Longshoremen Union have an obligation to change a lot of their demands to make them more reasonable for the 21st century and make sure that we don't lose out on those productivity gains.